Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Racha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. This is an article that I found on Zero Hedge. It's pretty interesting. This is published today, October 20th. And here you have Don Lemon, Lemonhead Lemon, urging black and brown Americans to arm themselves against ICE. Okay, and immediately, right, what comes to mind is 2 Ezra 15. But what's interesting is, with situations like this, one thing to always keep in mind is you may wonder at first, well, just because he said it or urged it doesn't mean people are going to do it, or who cares what he says, right? However, with how they've accustomed the minds of Americans today, sometimes all it takes is for somebody to say what everybody else has been thinking. And that sparks, other people. It's like how the Me Too movement goes, right? One chick comes out, and by her coming out, now everybody else wants to come out, right? So by him saying this, don't be surprised if more quote unquote leftists start pushing this and supporting this to create a more hostile clash, right? To where you're not just dealing with protesting with cardboards or signs, okay, but now arming yourself. Now, I'm going to read this article, but one thing you have to ask yourself, right, always looking ahead, is if you urge them, right, and let's say that they do arm themselves, and then he says that that's your Second Amendment right, what's going to be the difference now? Are you going to buy a firearm, carry it, just to end up getting shoved to the ground and then arrested just like you would had you not had the firearm? Or is he urging them, and as well, as we're gonna read in the article, to use it? And if that's the case, then you're really calling for another major escalation, right? Because now, at what point does an individual who is armed, who let's say is mistaken for somebody else and is grabbed up by ICE, decide to unload their clip on them? And ICE will return fire. And if that becomes a trend, then they now go into the quote. Now the American cities become like a battlefield. And if you know anything about martial law, right, the word martial law means warlike law. Martial going back to war. So if the cities become like a battlefield, then in order to rectify that, right, or calm the situation, that's where you have cases like martial law. Anyway, let's read this real quick. Disgraced former CNN host Don Lemon urged black and brown Americans on Wednesday to take up arms, warning they could be swept up in President Donald Trump's ICE operations. So far, what do we have? We have a nation that's protesting against their president, calling him a king, in other words, right, by having a protest called No Kings Protest. And then you have the president who, quite frankly, shows you he doesn't give a crap, because he posted that AI video of him, a couple of different meme-like videos of him, flying. One, he was flying in a fighter, like a jet, and then dropping like mud or shit or whatever on the protesters. And then he posts different, telling, foreshadowing kind of memes on his Truth Social. And it's interesting that they call it that, right? Truth Social, because in actuality, he does show you glimpses, right? They show it to the people before they do it. And now it's coming from their own mouths. So you'll see posts like, I think there was one that came out that he posted where it shows a picture of him and it's like Trump forever, in terms of like being in office, right? So he's showing you these things. And soon enough, when it comes to pass and it becomes that reality, people will look back to these posts. They'll look back to these times, right? The escalation or the provocation, and they'll say, damn, the warning signs were right there. So it says here, he made the incendiary claim during a podcast. Now let's type that in here. Incendiary sin. It says here of a device or attack designed to cause. Okay, so I'm wondering why they use this. I guess maybe from the. Did I look at the word right? Oh, incendiary. Not. Yeah, that's the right word. Okay, so maybe it's like, in other words, saying he dropped this bomb, right? Or this explosive. He made this like explosive claim, right? This wild claim. So I would assume that's the use in which in this word here. So he made the incendiary claim during a podcast interview with Wajahat Ali, citing the small number of cases involving U.S. citizens being briefly detained by ICE in cities like Chicago. Quote unquote, I just want to be very clear here. I am not condoning or promoting violence, Lemon began, before invoking the Second Amendment. Now, usually when you hear people proceed what they're about to say with, I am not blah, 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 that's a caution because either A, they genuinely are not, but what they're saying can be interpreted as they are, or B, they are, but they're trying to give you put a claim out there to cover their ass. So he says here, here's what I'm saying to black and brown people, to Mexican people, to people who are those Israelites, to people who are here legally and who can go and buy a gun legally and have a license to carry legally. Go do it. Why not? Go do it. It is your Second Amendment right. And for what reason? To use against ICE? Well, that's federal authority right there. It says here, Don Lemon instructs illegal aliens to go out and get a gun because when you have people knocking on your door and taking you away, isn't that what the Second Amendment was written for? The left is trying to get ICE agents killed. Isn't this interesting? Let's hear this.
Black people, brown people of all stripes, whether you're an Indian American or a Mexican American or whoever you are, go out in your place where you live and get a gun legally, get a license to carry legally. Because when you have people knocking on your door and taking you away without due process as a citizen, isn't that what the Second Amendment was written for? Go back and read what the Second Amendment says. And perhaps it will knock some sense in the heads of these people who are saying, well, it's all great. I don't believe they're doing it without due process. They're asking people for papers. They're not really beating people up. These people are doing things that are illegal. Nobody is illegal. It is a misdemeanor to cross the border.
So there you go. We'll get some precepts on it. There's one in particular, like I mentioned before. Let's read a little bit more. Lemon then urged black households and Indian Americans, Mexican Americans, and as he put it, whatever you are, to purchase firearms legally, claiming the show of force could discourage the Trump administration from conducting immigration raids. Now, oftentimes, when people they go and buy these guns and maybe they go to the shooting range a couple of times, they get a false sense of power, right? A little taste of, oh shit, I'm somebody, I could do something. In that case, there's something called trigger happy. They're not interested per se. If they have a gun, they're not really interested in just showing it off, especially in cities like Chicago. It's nothing new to them. Okay. So if you're telling them to do this, in their minds, they're going to be trying to figure out, okay, well, if I have it on me and it's legal, and now maybe I may not know too much about the Constitution or the different amendments, but if he's saying that it's okay and what he's saying kind of makes sense, then I should be okay to defend myself. Maybe let me fire back or fire a shot or two. And then you get riddled with bullets. Oh, shit. Then what? But once again, right, it's another escalation in the provocation that we know what it's going to lead to at the end of the day. So let's see where we at. Get a license. I think, did I read this? Anyway, let's read it again. Get a license to carry legally, he said, Because when you have people knocking on your door and taking you away without due process as a citizen, isn't that what the Second Amendment was written for? He continued, go back and read what the Second Amendment says. Yeah, we just heard all that. Let's see. Lemon's comments come amid the legacy media's fixation on rare cases of American citizens briefly detained during ICE raids, most of which are quickly clarified or resolved. And what's also interesting is the whole, not to forget this guy, Zoran, right? Zoran Mamdani, which, it's my personal take. I think that he's gonna, be the next mayor, just because it just makes more sense as to how they're trying to set up the narrative. But we'll watch and see, okay? But in a case like that, don't be surprised, because now it's pretty blatant that this is like a left versus right, Democrat versus Republican thing. At least that's the narrative they're going with, because we know the puppet master controls both the right hand and the left hand, right? So even from the government level, where they have this government shutdown, and it's literally like a back and forth, right? It's like they bring it, the Senate says no, then it's just continually shut down. And Trump pushes that this is the Democrat shutdown, right? So you're seeing this division, as the Lord said, and it's only going to escalate more and more and more, because it has to. If Ezra and the different prophets saw what they did, what they saw was the heightened level of it. So we're living in the escalation. Okay, we're living in the, when you watch the movie trailer and the guy, he's standing there in front of the other guy, and you just see in the trailer, he's punching him and bop, bop, you know what I'm saying? Or you just see in the trailer, one of them throws a punch and punches the other guy in the face. And you're wondering, when you start watching the movie, when you actually go to start watching the movie, you find out, wait, oh, these are the guys I saw in the trailer. But wait, they're best friends. So what happened? Right? And then as you watch the movie, you see how things escalate, one leads to another, and then eventually you see they say, yo, meet up over here, and then that over here is the scene where you saw from the movie or from the trailer, and you're like, oh wait, this is where the guy punched him from the trailer, and then one thing leads to one, and so you finally get to see what was said, what triggered who, to get to the point where this guy ends up getting mad, and then you see that scene play again where he throws that punch and punches the other guy. Right, so that's basically how we are. That's where we are, right? We're living in the escalation until the climactic scenes from the trailer, i.e., from these books that the prophets saw. So it says here, Lemon's comments come amid. I read that. White House border czar Tom Homan has repeatedly clarified that ICE conducts only targeted operations focused on individuals with existing deportation orders. However, illegal aliens without such orders, as well as citizens lacking proper identification, may be temporarily detained if swept up during these raids. When reached by email, Lemon could not provide evidence of any widespread targeting of U.S. citizens by ICE by the time of publication. And then this is his full remark. How long is this?
Okay, so let me...
Yeah, we're not watching 50 minutes of that. Sorry. But maybe I'll see if I can leave a comment of this article in the comment section, and you can check it out. But these are also interesting, right? You have here Mexican cartels placing bounties on federal agents. Homan says DOJ probing funding behind organized attacks on ICE, right? For God's sake, stop the rhetoric. Border czar Tom Homan pleads with anti-ICE Dems. So what you're starting to see here is almost like this coalition against these ICE agents, against federal authority. This, once again, is where they want to be, because this guy Trump has the ability to overturn the situation, but we always tell you it needs to be justified. Okay, problem, reaction, solution. They have to justify it. So just like when you watch, if you went to watch a movie and the main character just they don't even build up the backstory of the villain. Like before this guy becomes the villain, imagine Batman going and beating up the Joker before he becomes the Joker. You're like, well, I mean, okay, then that's the end of the movie. All right, then that ain't nothing really good about it. But if the villain gets built up, right, he's causing mayhem. He's invoking a feeling within you to be like, yo, can somebody please take this guy out of here? Then it's more satisfying when the protagonist, which maybe in the beginning, right, the typical underdog story, you know, he gets whooped, but then he goes and does what he got to do, and then he comes back and then he does, you know, he takes care of business, right? That story, right, that they even use in movies is similar to what they do here. Justification. The villain is bad enough to where the hero needs to have a power up that he can use to whoop his ass, right? When you watch anime, it's always some, you know, like Dragon Ball Z, it's always some super crazy overpowered villain that justifies why the main character or Goku needs a new transformation, right? Why he needs Ultra Instinct. If he was going against freaking, you know, I don't know, Nappa or the Ginyu Force, what does he need Ultra Instinct for? So it's the same thing here, right? In order for them to use that high, like that lethal force, and basically police the streets with actually tanks with them you know, machine guns mounted on them, and really give you that full dystopian, you know, setting, they need their justification. ICE agents are getting shot. They're getting attacked. They, you know, all this is they got cartels placing bounties on them. Like, and on top of that, you got the whole situation with Venezuela. Is it Venezuela? I think it is. But I think it's Central America. With the whole basically the campaign that the U.S. is having in there. Right. So very easily, you know, that can escalate more and more, and they can start actually, you know, causing a danger, okay, on the southern border, and maybe even in the southern states of the U.S. So we'll see. We'll see. But I wanted to bring this out. Let me get a quick precept on this, particularly this, right? And this is 2 Ezra 15 and 14. Woe to the world and them that dwell therein, for the sword and their destruction draweth nigh. And that's going to come coupled with Jacob's trouble, as we are pretty much in, right? But it's near, as it says, the sword and their destruction. And one people shall stand up and fight against another, and swords in their hands. So Ezra might not have understood what, in seeing these things, he might not have understood what is ICE. What are the Democrats? What are the liberals? What are the Republicans? What are the, you know, racists? I mean, obviously he could see it, and he could at best deduce like, okay, there's a group on one side opposing another group, right? And it's distinct enough, because if you look at ICE, they have uniform, right? Federal agents, they have uniform. So you can see, you can identify, even if you don't know what they stand for, you can identify that they're all part of one body based on how they are, versus maybe just citizens or people and whatnot. So he sees that, you know, you have clashes basically, but he also sees, as it says, and swords in their hands. Okay. So when he's urging people to go and buy guns to against ICE, what do you think they're going to use it for? What's the point in wasting money on a gun and carrying if you're not going to use it? Right? For there shall be sedition among men. Once again, we've gone into that. They can classify this as a form of that, because they can say, well, you're trying to incite people to defy federal authority or the authority of the powers that be. Okay. And that can be classified as seditious speech, right, among men, and invading one another. They shall not regard their kings nor princes. What are they protesting? No kings protest. So isn't that interesting? And the course of their actions shall stand in their power. And we're about to witness this in full effect. So stay tuned. Anyway, I'm going to end it here. Lord willing, that was edifying and informative to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Recha Kodash. Until next time, Shalom.